Okay, I'd like to call the work session on reopening of schools of July 27th, 2020 meeting to order. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic from which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's Jess.
Okay, so I would like to officially welcome everybody to the meeting, the work session on reopening of the schools. I want to thank all of you and the administrators and community members who are joining us this evening. I hope this meeting will be informative and will give everyone who's listening a better sense of the process the administrators and committees went through to yield the plans that you'll be hearing about a little later tonight, and that you'll have a clearer idea of what the process will be and how it will follow in the coming weeks, and how we will determine how Pelham schools will reopen in the fall. Before we begin, I must thank our administrators and our teachers and other staff members who worked countless hours this summer beginning to plan for the fall, long before they received any guidance or answers from the governor and state education about the reopening of school in New York State. They continue to work tirelessly to plan and refine our reopening plans, even though we still don't have all the answers. We can't thank you guys enough. As you will hear tonight, during this most unusual summer, committees met for hours on end working out the details for 3 possible scenarios for the reopening of school. I want to thank all the parents who joined us for those calls to provide us with honest feedback and perspective. Lastly, having participated in a few of these committees myself and having researched the plans and communications in our neighboring school districts, I have to say that I am so proud of the work of our administrative team and of our district. It is clear that your process was thorough, open-minded, and that you considered every factor as you crafted these plans. You clearly put the health and wellness of our students and staff at the forefront of your decision-making process, and we thank you. It's important to note that these plans will evolve. Just like our plans in the spring, we don't have all the answers right now, as I mentioned, and it's something that's going to evolve throughout the year with your feedback. I imagine that we will have surveys throughout the fall. Similarly, we're presenting these 3 scenarios, and we may toggle between 2 or 3 of them throughout this school year. I keep saying how we begin the school year may not be how we end the school year. And so I ask for everybody's patience and understanding during this time. So without further ado, I will end these remarks so we can move on to the rest of the meeting. And this brings me to section 2, which is approval of the minutes. I'd like to take a consent agenda for items 2.1 and 2.2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Thanks, Eileen and Benny. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Before we move on to the work session, one thing that I forgot to add is that I've received a few people who have written in for public comment, and please do so to email me to jddomenico@pelhamschools.org by 8 p.m. this evening, and I can read your comments into the public record. Thank you. So item 3 is our work session. So Dr. Champ, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jessica. And I as well want to begin tonight by thanking the administrative team. I believe all of whom is with us tonight on the call to be resources as we answer questions. This team has literally been working nonstop since February, actually. A lot of folks don't even realize that. February, as we headed into what was left of the year, and then the closure began certainly in March. And they've been working nonstop since then, supporting staff, students, and parents through what has been the most difficult time in any of our lifetimes. While they were working to wrap up a truly traumatic school year for students and adults, they were already beginning to meet to plan for the unknowns of the year to come. And because of their commitment to our students and the staff of Pelham, and their desire to create the best possible learning environment in the midst of such hardship and chaos, They literally have given their blood, sweat, and tears and many, many days, nights, and weekends to get to this point. I thank them for their incredible professionalism, leadership, and hard work. Please know that they have and will continue to be here to support all of our students and to help our parents through what will be a very unusual fall and school year ahead of us. But each of us is committed and ready to dig in and to do the hard work um, that is ahead. We all want nothing more than for our kids to be back in school and for life to be returned to normal. Yet we all recognize that it will not be the normal that we're accustomed to, because the health and safety of every staff member and student must be at the forefront of our minds in all decisions. That has been and will continue to be our top priority. It will be another challenging year, and we will continue to need to communicate, collaborate, and adjust. As Jessica said, we'll be seeking feedback throughout the process and implementation. And we trust that whatever does come our way, we will work together through it. I think it's important to recognize that no plan will be perfect, no plan will work for every district, and no plan will work for every family in our district. I think it's important that we recognize that and put that out there up front. We all experienced through the spring, we were handed a whole lot of really not so good choices to choose from. Did the best we could. And we were in a very reactive stance where we were having to make a lot of quick decisions on on the fly with no guidance. We're in somewhat of a better position in that we've had the summer to plan and we have been actively planning. We have some guidance, although not full guidance. And the fact is the best laid plans still will have problems. So I think it's just important that we put that out to, to level set for the community. We are committed to doing this and giving our children the most effective, safe, healthy learning environment that we can do, recognizing that every family has a unique situation. So what we try to do is take into account the feedback that we had gotten through a variety of surveys, conversations with parents, committees, and try to think of those guiding principles that would help us to craft a plan that could work for most people. We recognize the plan will evolve, as Jessica said, and our goal really is to try to do that in a way where we as a community, a school community, and a greater community try to be as much on the same page as possible. And again, doing it in a way that is safe, reasonable, and flexible as we move forward. Before I move on to the next slide, I do also want to thank the many teachers and specialists that participated on the planning committees. Their voices were incredibly important to us in knowing what was reasonable and doable. And each of them brought unique perspectives that helped to make the plans better with each iteration. We also want to thank the committees that shared a preview of this plan with us last week. We thank the Authentic Learning Committee, the Community Engagement and Advocacy Committee, as well as the Executive Board of our PTA Council. They really, great questions, great thinkers, really tuned into the needs of the community and the needs of our students, and their feedback was truly appreciated as we work toward the presentation that you will be seeing tonight. We still are awaiting final guidance from the governor's office. We do anticipate at some point next week that the governor will make a determination based on the metrics of the region as to whether schools in our region, in our area, can open in some capacity. We're not sure yet what that announcement will encompass and exactly when it will be made, but that will help us to guide, again, finalization of the plans that we'll be discussing tonight. So there are still numerous things up in the air. I think that's just the honest truth of where we are, and all districts are really in that position. But we are hoping that the plans that we have in place with the governor's decision next week will help us to move relatively quickly into a finalized plan that is ready to implement. So at this time, I'm going to share my screen so that I can present our PowerPoint for the evening. I am going to go relatively quickly and because it is lengthy. Probably the more important piece will be the fact that we have, as I said earlier, our administrative team here. And so many of them have been so directly involved in the planning that they're here to help support and to assist with questions tonight. So I actually excuse me 1 second. We got to get back to the beginning. Okay. All right. So as we began planning for this, we divided our administrative teams into really a couple different key committees. We developed a K-5 as well as a 6-12 committee made up of teachers and administrators who met throughout the last 6 weeks to begin to look at what virtual and in-person learning could look like. They worked to draft plans that would provide high quality education that is developmentally appropriate and manageable for teachers to deliver. Committees focused on, additional committees focused on health and safety, logistics, and communications as well. Those committees met to consider those aspects of the reopening plan with the primary focus on adjustments that would be needed initially for a return to in-person learning, given that they were health, safety, and logistics. It is no surprise that much of the work between health, safety, and logistics and the instructional programs overlap significantly as our physical spaces have direct implications for learning and vice versa. Our groups, all of them began really with a focus on health and safety first, and second with a focus on both physical and social and emotional health. Obviously, physical safety measures will be incredibly important in any physical return to school. Social and emotional wellness will need to be the lead focus in every and any version of a return to school, given what our students have endured over these past few months. Forming relationships with students, establishing a safe and welcoming learning community where all students feel they belong and are connected is our first task when we return, and one that will need to be attended to throughout this year more than ever. With those connections in place, we all know that learning, without those connections in place, we all know that learning just will not happen for our students. We also have many students who have struggled and became disengaged throughout the spring. We will work as a school community to find ways to re-engage them in the learning process and restore the fun and connection and relevance that comes from true learning. We all recognize this will only be done when we start with relationships, and we look forward to working with our parents and community in partnership as we work to reestablish and reestablish relationships with those who have been here, but also to reestablish new connections and relationships as students start the year with new teachers. I alluded to this earlier, and it probably goes without saying, but every district will have a different plan. Districts had the freedom to develop plans and needed to be able to address the unique circumstances of their districts, whether it be the physical plant, the size of the school, transportation issues, etc. So every district will have a different plan. And while we did take some efforts to align with the region, we really strived to find what we felt was the best plan for Pelham, a plan where we felt that we could put our heads on the pillow at night, knowing that we have done the best for our students, and a plan that fit the unique needs and priorities of our community. So just a few highlights that I think are important to note, which will support the ongoing work of the district this year. A lot of this certainly came out of lessons learned from last year and has been being put into place this summer. So we did work this summer to, thanks to our incredible tech department. It's probably one of the smallest tech departments in the region, and they have done an outstanding job, and they have worked nonstop, and we will see the fruits of their labor come to be with this list, but also as we move into the fall. We were able to identify a number of software programs that are going to be really important tools for our students and teachers as we head into the school year, especially when we think about the fact that we will likely be shifting models during the course of this year, whether it be to virtual, whether it be to hybrid or to a full in-person model. We need tools that will carry us across those learning platforms. So these are some content specific tools in particular. You see some math, News ELA, Screenify, Flipgrid, different tools that we've discovered throughout the year that we believe will be helpful to teachers in the coming year. We've also worked through our E-rate funding to upgrade our entire district wireless network so that we have the bandwidth and the updated capacity to handle the full virtual online learning setting should it be needed. We're expanding the use of Infinite Campus Parent Portal at the K-5 level. Secondary parents will be very familiar with the parent portal, but this is something that will be new to our K-5 level, which should help our parents and students stay engaged more seamlessly. And it puts everything into an electronic portal so that we are not in a position where we're still relying on as many hard copy mailings of different events or different communications and resources for families. We are going to continue to use Google Classroom at all levels, K through 12. Again, that was something when we started in the closure, we did not have in place at the elementary. Very quickly, jump-started that into place over the course of the first month or so of the closure. That is something we're going to continue to rely on and to use more skillfully and effectively at the elementary level. We're moving away from some of those templates that folks saw in the spring and making more use of Google Classroom the way that it was designed to be used. So hopefully a lot of the clicking and the links and those things that folks struggled with back in the spring, we should have a more seamless process and better user experience. We've also simplified some of the login access for our youngest learners, recognizing they will have the most challenge in this environment. And another tool that we think is going to be crucial in delivering instruction regardless of setting is we procured AVER 4K document cameras for all instructional spaces in the district. That is a document camera, so that obviously gives the teachers the ability to project whatever documents they're looking at and working on. They can turn it up to project whatever's on their smartboard. And in effect, it functions as a webcam. So that will be a tool in all classrooms so that for those students who are unable to come to school due to health and safety issues, we will be able to live stream what is happening in the classrooms back to students in their homes through that document camera webcam. And that again will be an important tool in any model that we are in the fall. Additionally, we're working to increase professional development to support these new tools and support our teachers as these demands continue to increase. And we're looking to expand our district's one-to-one Chromebook program. Very briefly on that, as many folks know, we did have one-to-one Chromebook in the past year from grades 7 through 12. We are expanding that now to include every students from grades 3 through 12 in the coming year. So what that will look like, students from 7th grade and up will just hold on to the devices that they received last year. We'll have new devices for the students that are starting 6th grade this fall. And then for students in grades 3, 4, and 5, we're currently planning to set up classroom carts of devices. There will be one for each student in each classroom, 3 through 5. They will be assigned to specific students so that we're not sharing devices. And then should we need to move into a hybrid or a virtual environment, those will be given to the students to then have at home with them, again, with Google Classroom, so that we continue that seamless instruction between school and home. The students at the youngest grades will be able to receive district devices upon request. Many of those students are very dependent upon their parent and devices from home to engage. So those students will continue to have that freedom, but we will make those devices available upon request to any family or child that needs them. So moving into the details of our plans. So the way that the state has set this up, although we do not know yet how we will be reopening, it's important to note that the state has mandated that all districts develop 3 different plans to be submitted to the state this Friday. So we are in the process of finalizing those plans. Tonight's presentation is part of that. So we have received one more opportunity for feedback as we finalize our plans. And we need to submit these to the state, and then we will find out again the governor's decision based on metrics of the region. Additional information is still forthcoming this week from the Department of Health to guide us in our decisions about deciding which model we use. As of right now, we do not have those metrics at the local level, although we will likely be making those decisions at the local level in partnership with the Department of Health. So they have told us by the end of the week, they plan to issue more guidelines around that. So to help us know when it's appropriate to be in a full virtual environment versus a hybrid environment versus when it would be potentially possible to go back to a full return to in-person school. So more to come on that front. So when it came to planning, our team started with what we knew the most about, which really came down to the first 2 options on this list. Full in-person learning, because we know what school is like to run in person. We did have Department of Health guidelines that would guide some of the safety and health changes that would need to be made. And we also knew a lot about remote learning from what we learned in the spring. Lots of feedback, lots of experience to rely on there. So those two areas is where our planning began. We also, as we approached this work, knew that it would be critical to have some form of alignment between these plans because, as I said before, we likely will be moving between plans at any given point in time during the year. There's also a potential that we could move at the district level as a whole, like we did in the spring, where it's a full shutdown or full open. We could potentially close down particular schools. We could potentially close down particular classrooms based on any given scenario. And again, the guidelines around what happens when you have a student test positive or a staff member test positive or a family member test positive, we have not yet received that clear guidance from the Department of Health either. That is anticipated this week. So I know there's many questions around that as well that we are eager to answer and eager to have the answers for. So we're going to begin with a look at the in-person plan. And this really mainly starts with facilities, health and safety requirements. So just run through these. I know it's a lot of text. I apologize for that. We will make this PowerPoint available on the website afterwards too, for those who can't can't take it all in or can't see all of it. So head custodians are going to maintain a daily schedule of cleaning and disinfecting, special focus on high touch surfaces, etc. Facilities will be provided, will provide all staff with PPE, including masks, gloves, gowns, etc. upon request. All staff are required to wear masks. We will be requiring all students to wear masks as well. So we will have masks available to any student who comes to school without one. The only exception to that will be when people are eating or taking mask breaks. Since we're requiring masks, we do need also to provide mask breaks. Anytime anyone is eating or on a mask break without a mask, they are required to be 6 feet socially distanced. Our focus is going to be strongly encouraging social distancing at all times to the greatest degree possible. But we do recognize that we do have older buildings with somewhat smaller classrooms, hallways, and as I think most people know, our enrollment's been growing. So our buildings are very highly enrolled. So knowing that we can not always maintain that social distancing, that was part of our thinking in going the step of requiring full masks. So again, PPE will be available, masks will be required and available to students and to staff at all times at the school. Our facilities department will also be providing hand sanitizer and wipes for all greeters at entrances. Nurses will have additional PPE as well. Hand sanitizer and wipes in all offices and all classrooms where usage can be properly supervised in accordance with New York State Fire Code. We're in the process of installing at least one touch-free faucet in every bathroom, as well as auto-feed paper towels to reduce high-touch surfaces. Currently back ordered, but we're hoping those are in so we can get those, as I said, at least one per bathroom installed before the start of school. And we're also capping off some of our drinking fountains so that only the bottle filling portion can be used. So we will be putting out disposable cups. We do, again, as we started last year, really strongly urge staff and students to bring reusable water bottles for their own purpose. Please have their names on them so that we don't have bottles mixed up, but we still will have the water bottle fillers available. Additional facilities information. The district is working on installing code compliant dividers throughout the district in identified areas, certainly beginning with offices and places where there's a lot of interaction with the public. We are minimizing visitors to the building, but where there's still a frequent amount of interaction and places where we've identified that the ability to socially distance may be limited, we're working to install those plastic dividers, and we're being prepared if we find and identify additional areas that we can continue to add dividers throughout the district. We've obtained electrostatic sprayers, which will be used regularly for sanitizing. And additional products that will aggressively attach to various surfaces to help combat this virus and any virus. We've changed out all filters on all of our ventilation systems, and all of our systems are up to code, given the current codes that are required. We obviously have older buildings. Even though we are up to code, we do have older buildings. So from the guidance that we're reading and looking at, the goal really will be to increase airflow to the schools through opening of windows to the greatest degree, natural air, ideally into the buildings. Certainly the middle school, which is our fully conditioned building, does have a mechanical ventilation system that has been filters changed, cleaned, and all systems checked to make sure that it is running at least up to code, if not better. We're going to have signage throughout our buildings. We're also reminding people of health and safety measures. We'll also be marking walls and floors as appropriate with 6-foot social distancing markings to have a visual cue to help everyone remember about social distancing and helping our staff to help reinforce that with our students, and providing constant reminders in a variety of ways. We are going to be limiting the outside use of school facilities. We'll probably be limiting that down to only our before and after school care programs as a starting point, because again, we want to reduce cross-contamination of people in the buildings. And we also want to have as much time as possible to do as thorough cleaning as possible each night. So very restricted use of school facilities for the time being. We are currently exploring the use of tents to expand the footprints of our schools. It's important to note that there are state ed requirements and approvals necessary when it comes to use of tents. There's also issues that need to be considered with regards to student safety. We've got now a student threat inside our schools through COVID, but we yet still continue to have exterior threats that we need to keep in mind when it comes to the safety of our students. So at the moment, we're trying to work through the process to try to obtain at least a couple tents for each of the elementary campuses, and a significant, potentially as many, looking to 10 to 15 potentially at the secondary campus, so that we can expand out onto the fields for use for our students, especially thinking of times where we've got large groups that assemble to a degree that we need to space out. And that's thinking particularly of lunch, of physical education, music performance groups, etc. And again, as I said earlier, masks will be required, but during lunch periods, masks will be off, which means we must meet the 6-foot requirement, which means we need more space. So we are exploring that potential as part of our plans. When we think about health and safety, specifically, there will be questionnaires required of all students to be completed daily before they come to school. We're working, in some cases, they could be submitted by paper. Others, we may be able to submit electronically. We're still working out the systems on those, and more information on that will come from your principals. All students will be required to have their temperature taken and to attest to various COVID symptoms before entering the buildings. If a student comes without that information, they will be brought to a discrete location, their temperature taken, and those questions asked before they are permitted to move on into the building. All adults will be required to take their temperature and fill out a daily health questionnaire as well, and visitors as well. We are very significantly limiting visitors, only which those are required by district business. But again, anyone who comes into the buildings will have to meet those same requirements. This is one area we're going to really need parent partnership on student health. As I think everyone knows, it's very easy to take a couple Tylenol and bring temperatures down and everyone feels better and send students to school. We cannot be in a position of doing that this year. Everyone's health is impacted by the decisions that we all make. So we have to really have a concerted effort by our community as a whole. Anytime our children are not feeling well, anytime a staff member is not feeling well, that they stay home. It's about protecting them, and it's about protecting the entire school community. Moving on to a couple other items in this area. Our nurses are in the process of preparing educational videos that will be used with our students and with our staff, and certainly could be made available to parents to reinforce health practices that it will be so important. Everything from hand washing, sneezing, PPE, mask wearing, et cetera, things that will be really important to maintaining the health and safety of our students. We also are in the process of finalizing plans for management of ill students in the building, where they would be immediately assessed, isolated, sent home, proper cleaning protocols put in place. And of course, there would be cooperation with the Department of Health were there to be any confirmed or suspected cases of COVID within the schools. We will also be working with Department of Health on contact tracing. So there will likely be more logs going into place of people coming into spaces, out of spaces, and working to make sure that we can more efficiently do contact tracing that will be necessary, and make the important notifications to those who are impacted. And again, as was done in the last year, and I know this can be a very frustrating point for us as well as for parents, there are confidentiality guidelines that must be adhered to with notifications. We will notify to the degree that we are able, but please understand there are limitations, and we will do everything to keep everyone safe and work with the Department of Health, recognizing and respecting those limitations on confidentiality. With regard to safety drills, we are still required to do all the safety drills. New York State has not loosened those restrictions. So we are still expecting to do evacuation drills, which are usually we call them our fire drills, for lockdown drills during the school. So we will be doing that, but we are allowed modifications. So we are expecting that all drills this year will be announced in advance. We will be doing our evacuation drills with social distancing in place. And with regard to lockdown drills, we will not be putting students into closets and corners and bathrooms. We will be educating them on the process of what would happen in the drill, verbally educating them, but we will not be moving students close together. It does not make any sense from a health and safety perspective. Our students know what to do. We will continue to reinforce and educate them. We may need to do these, if we're in a hybrid model, we may need to do more of them so that all students have the opportunity to participate in the drills. But please know that we will still be doing drills, but doing them in a way that recognizes the safety and health demands of the new settings in which we are living. So now moving more into the kind of the classroom, how does a full return or an in-person return impact the classrooms and the academic program? So at the K-5 level, and again, the details are not all here. Some of those are being worked out. All of these will be communicated to you as we get closer to the start of school, most likely through your building principals. But we're in the process of considering staggered start and end times to reduce gathering of students. We are definitely anticipating, if we have a return to school, that students will remain in their classrooms for all subjects, including specials and lunch. That minimizes the interaction of cohorts of students and helps to reduce the cross-contamination. Specials teachers would then be bringing materials to the classrooms. I know, Colonial I think it was a year or so ago, because of our large enrollments, we had music teachers were coming to the classrooms. That will be a similar scenario in the year to come. Art, music, FLES, technology, library, those teachers will be coming to the classrooms and bringing necessary materials with them. Students who have intervention services or special education services will go out to other teachers for those services. So there will be some movement there, but the bulk of the student time will be spent in their classroom. Teachers will work with principals to establish bathroom protocols so that we prevent overcrowding, but that we also provide access to the bathrooms and access to hand washing, especially when there's classrooms that may not have a sink. We're in the process of compiling lists to help us come up with supply kits that teachers and students can have in class so that we limit the sharing of supplies. So where each student would have their own supply box. We're also starting to think about what a supply kit for home would look like. Again, since we may fluidly move through models, it's important that each student have the supplies they need to fully engage in the learning experiences with minimized sharing. Anything that is shared will be sanitized in between students. We're also looking to remove any extraneous furniture from the classroom and extraneous items so that we can distance desks as far apart as possible. And looking for no use of cubbies, coat rooms, lockers, etc. So again, we're going to need parent partnership on thinking ahead about minimizing those things that come to school, only that which is necessary. Students keeping coats and belongings on their chair, in their desk that they've been assigned to, so that we minimize gathering and minimize opportunities for contact between students. As I said before, we have the document cameras that are going to be the live stream to be providing opportunities for students who are not able to be in school to watch from home. So each classroom will be outfitted with those. But this is where we get into some of the really tough realities that all of us are starting to wrap our minds around about what school will look like. It will not be school as we're used to it. We are not at this point in time for the foreseeable future able to have assemblies or town halls. No field trips in person for the time being. We strongly encourage virtual field trips, but no in-person field trips. For the time being, we're suspending band and chorus, again, because we cannot have large group ensembles. There's particular issues around those two subject areas, and the guidelines require at least 12 feet social distancing in those scenarios. So for the moment, we will be suspending those. We're still making decisions at this point about concerts and plays. Again, we can't have audiences at this point in time. We're still in discussions as to whether planning for any of, for the plays themselves or any kind of live concert is even viable. Any meetings that we hold would be held either virtually or socially distanced. This could have implications for parent-teacher conferences and back-to-school nights, should we still be in this kind of a situation when those times of the year come. So again, as those dates get closer, you'll be hearing more information from your principals. Staff rooms are going to be making adjustments there. And as I mentioned before, we are exploring tents, whether there's tents or not. We will be encouraging teachers to make the greatest use possible safely of outdoor space. Certainly, since we'll be providing mask breaks, outdoors is the best place to do that. So the building principals will work with their staff to coordinate use of that outside space to the greatest degree possible. And unfortunately, we are going to have to limit PTA activities as well. We'll certainly be in conversations with our PTAs about what activities are still possible, because they play such a crucial part in connecting our schools, our parents with our teachers, with our students, and really bringing that school to home connection in, which is going to continue to be important. So I say all that, and I know that's a lot to take in, but it clearly is not going to be business as usual. It's going to be upsetting for a lot of us as adults to come into an environment look like this, all the more for our children, especially those who have been to school and know what school should be and what it used to be. It's going to be incredibly different, and it's going to be very hard. So what we're stressing with our staff, and what we continue to stress, which probably goes without saying, but it will be said, we have to take the time, all of us, to attend to the personal, social, and emotional needs of the students and of one another as we start this school year and as we go through this school year. Education, explanation, and patience will be crucial throughout the year, because this is stressful on everyone. And we're going to be processing a new normal. The same way we all grieved the loss of our normal way of life back in the spring. And I distinctly remember recognizing phases of grieving going on in myself and others. We're going to go through a similar grieving process as we start to return to school and adapt to whatever models we're in, because it will be different. In many of the things that we loved and enjoyed are not going to be there in the same way. So we need to recognize that, we need to name it, and we need to be sure to attend to it, because students will not be able to engage in the learning process if we don't take care of the social and emotional needs first. Moving to the 612 level, you're going to see a lot of similar themes. For the time being, we're not going to be using lockers, and we've asked teachers to limit requirements to essential resources, whether it's textbooks, notebooks, materials, supplies, etc. Certainly Chromebooks will need to be coming back and forth, but to really work to limit those, because those backpacks are going to be on the children's backs, and we do not want them to be an undue burden. They're also going to be in the classrooms taking up space. So we're going to really work to focus on essentials. We are also looking at staggered start times, staggering of class passing to reduce density in the hallways, and potentially staggered dismissals as well. Those plans are still in process. As I mentioned before, during lunch in particular, we need to socially distance to safely do that without masks. So we're also looking at how might we repurpose our libraries, alumni hall or auditorium, outdoor spaces, and gymnasiums to give us additional space for those large group activities. There is an initial conversation beginning at the high school about potentially expanding open campus privileges to enable, again, to reduce density, where students can leave the campus, get a break, space break, and be able to have lunch somewhere else. That is not a done deal, so students don't get too excited, but please just know that those conversations are happening, as it could be a viable solution. Teachers are being asked to rethink their instruction, as much as this grates against everything that we have been about when trying to move forward with authentic learning and student-centered learning. The reality is we need to reduce collaborative work. in our existing spaces. So using technology for collaboration instead of group work or physical close group work, leaning more on demonstrations as opposed to hands-on work, virtual approaches to demonstrating and modeling work for students. At the secondary level, we're also again thinking about supply kits, ways that we can reduce sharing of whether it's manipulatives, whether it's colored pencils, paint brushes, things like that that are classroom tool supplies necessary to do the work, trying to rethink those so that students can have a priority list of their own supplies and minimize the sharing that occurs. For physical education, we are moving to a sneakers only model, and we're not going to be using our locker rooms for changing. We'll only use them for bathrooms and nothing else. We're also looking again at redesigning the curriculum there to rely less on contact activities and more on expansion of our sports education initiative, fitness activities, activities that can be done more solo. And again, that reduce equipment use. Any equipment that is shared will be sanitized between uses. And also looking at additional PPE that may help to facilitate safe practices in the physical education class. Moving to the 6 and more on the 612 level, again, cameras in the rooms. And again, similar themes here that are really kind of difficult bites to swallow, but for the time being are the reality of how we will need to be functioning. No assemblies, no in-person field trips, strongly urge virtual field trips. As you may be aware, athletics, the start of athletics has been postponed till September 21st, pending further guidance from the governor's office and from the state physical education organization. That will be the start of the fall. They're looking at likely abbreviated season. So I expect we'll be hearing more on that as we get into September. We're still in discussions about how and if we will be having band, chorus, orchestra. Again, given the 12-foot social distancing requirements, space limitations, and safety concerns around that. So there'll be more information coming on that as we resolve those questions. Concerts, plays, the same thing. The one other piece different from elementary that I would mention here, but very similar, we definitely are going to be looking at limiting after school activities as well. And what you'll see is, again, a lot of the thinking behind some of this planning has been to minimize cohorts or groups of students for intermingling. So after school activities, unfortunately, is one of those ways that introduces all the more intermingling of students. So we'll be discussing and making decisions about that very shortly as to which activities may or may not be able to happen in person and which may be shifting to virtual. And again, I just put that reminder, given these conditions, this is not school as students know it. So social and emotional learning will be critical. As I said with the elementary, these changes are going to be difficult. There will be grief, there will be frustration, there will be acting out, and there's going to be a significant need for mental health support for our students. So we're going to need to be patient with ourselves, with one another, with our students, and recognizing the stress that's on everyone. And we as a school will very much all the more than ever, need to be partners with parents so that we can be on that same team and continue to support our children through this difficult time. Now I want to turn a little bit to virtual learning. So again, this is something that we learned a lot about this past spring. Everyone did their best to make the most of really a terrible situation. We really tried to take into account those plans, the lessons learned from the plans that we put forward. And there were some real successes out of what was put forward. And there were some areas that we recognized needed to be tweaked. So as we look forward to the new plans for this coming year, we took all that feedback into account. We brought that to our committees. And actually think that we're putting forward a plan that will meet many of those issues and concerns that were brought to us. As we started to plan, these were really the priority areas that we called from the feedback and experience learned in the spring. As again, it's a recurring theme, but it can't be said enough. Social emotional learning is going to be our priority. Making connections with students on the front end of the school year is going to be all the more critical. If we are in a virtual environment, that connection is just more challenging through a screen. So we have to attend to that, certainly at the beginning of any virtual setting and throughout. We recognize we need to increase teacher contact time with students, We need to increase feedback loops for formative and summative assessment. So we're in discussions about what assessment and grading will look like to increase accountability, but also to increase feedback, because that's what really drives true learning. We wanted to provide a more consistent specials rotation and interaction opportunity, especially at the elementary level, with specials teachers, since we did not have that through the spring. Wanted to try to keep our buildings and levels somewhat in line with one another. So keeping start times in line with secondary. Also, and I didn't elucidate on this slide, but it's important to note, a lot of the feedback we received through the spring and into the summer was parents recognizing, look, I know nothing's going to work for everybody. It's going to be hard, but we need to at least have some kind of consistency for children. So that'll be a recurring theme as we continue forward as well. We wanted to be mindful of screen time. I mean, we ourselves as adults have sat in 6 and 8 hours a day of online meetings, and it's just physically exhausting, mentally exhausting because of the venue. So we wanted to be attentive to that for our students, provide off downtime for lunch and for breaks throughout the day, movement breaks at the elementary, so we continue to sustain their ability to focus and to be productive. Again, mentioned supplies already. We wanted whatever schedule we built for the virtual learning to be somewhat parallel and mirrored in person, again, because of that likelihood that we have to move across models throughout the year. And of course, we're going to have to reimagine kindergarten and experience and really any of our youngest learners because this is just not an ideal setting for our youngest learners. So this is the proposed elementary schedule based on those discussions. Give you a moment to take that in for those that are watching on the screen. What this does, it mirrors our typical 6-day cycle rotation, which allows for instruction in all content area through the day. It allows for specials on a somewhat normal rotation. It also incorporates time for intervention blocks and a break for lunch. It also allows our teachers time for small group instruction throughout the day as they see as needed. And then it even provides an end of the day intervention and enrichment block, which can either be used for services, support services, for enrichment services, or for asynchronous work. So in case it's too small to see, you'll see we've got basically a block of about 2 hours in the morning from 9 to 11, where classroom teachers will be online with their class. And that would be not 2 hours straight of direct instruction, but likely a mini lesson followed by independent work. Another lesson, independent work, interaction with the class through the Google Meet. And so that's, again, where you've got opportunity for the teacher to maybe work with small groups of students, tap into individual students, go back to whole group instruction, and to use that time fluidly to meet the needs of each teacher's class. And teachers will have, again, I mentioned earlier, we're moving away from those grade level templates, documents that were used last year. Each teacher will have more freedom to teach their class in the style that they are most comfortable with to meet the needs of their particular class and student. There'll be a 1 hour break in the middle of the day for lunch, movement, etc. And then again, another 2 hour chunk for direct instruction in the afternoon from 12 to 2. Specials and intervention will be rotated throughout that for all classes over the course of the 6-day cycle. And then 2 o'clock, again, gives the opportunity for intervention, for enrichment, for time for students to go off and do some asynchronous work each day, etc. So we think that's a more robust schedule, far more contact time with teachers, more opportunities for small group, individual, as well as whole group time, but still trying to be attentive to the screen time issues of our students. Understanding that schedule is just a different use of time. We're giving our teachers kind of some minimum parameters, but understand this needs to be flexible based on the needs of the class. So minimally, we're looking for about 30 minutes of reading, 30 of writing, 30 of math each day. We are continuing to be committed to responsive classrooms as our way of meeting the social emotional, setting a tone for the social emotional climate of our classrooms. We're planning to train our second cohort of teachers, start that training this September. So we'll have approximately 2/3 of our teachers trained on that, fully trained on that model. So each day we'll again start with a morning meeting, but then teachers will have the flexibility to use those chunks of live time to address instruction across the content areas. There certainly will be supplemented with asynchronous learning materials, learning opportunities as well, And this will look different at different grade levels. So it's important that people not be comparing, their experience. Maybe I have a third grade child and a kindergartner. Their experiences are likely to be very different because of developmental differences and different developmental needs of the different groups of students. But just to give you an idea of somewhat what is going into the planning and thinking behind the instruction. The highlights that we see of it is, again, teachers are going to see their teachers regularly, daily for their classroom teachers, regularly for the specials teachers. It aligns very similar to if they were in person. So if we move from in person to virtual or vice versa, there should be some sense of routine and regularity to it, blending synchronous and asynchronous. One point I will say, students will have to leave their classroom teachers meet link and go to a different link for different teachers. So if they're going to a special or special education service, FLES, etc., they will go to a different link, but that will be embedded within the Google Classroom. So it should be somewhat simpler than last year. Break time in there for lunch, movement, less screen time at specials, etc. I think I've hit most of these points. Yes. So we see those as the highlights of the plan. There's some additional pieces of what we're looking at as well. We want to try to develop some resources to train students and parents on technology skills that are going to help to support them in this environment, especially K2s. Even simple things like muting the computer while they stay on and do their independent work, and using things like timers so the teacher can then get their attention back, because our kindergarten students, many of which don't know how to tell time. So to say, okay, everybody come back in 20 minutes, or to come back at 11 o'clock, that's not going to make sense for students. So thinking about really simple ways that we can train students and parents, tools that will help them to make this virtual learning environment more manageable from home. We've got those things in the works. Said before, Google Classroom is going to be our key learning platform that we will all be relying on. Working with students who have individualized schedules, so students who receive various kinds of services. One of the service providers will work with those students and the parents to make sure that there's individualized schedules are clear and manageable. We'll be planning movement breaks, and there will be recommendations on how parents at home can incorporate movement breaks into the day for their students to keep them sane, keep them focused, keep them energized throughout the day. And another piece that we're going to be looking to partner with parents on is setting clear expectations. We'll need parents, your partnership and expectations in working on what to expect from the classroom, how to maintain appropriate support for your student, yet let teachers do the work that they need to do with students. And then for students, we really want to reinforce with them a message about, even though you're at home, this is still school, this is your school. So habits of waking up at an appropriate time, eating breakfast before class starts, not rushing in, but showing up prepared, not coming in your pajamas, but dressing appropriately, finding a place in your home that you can set up to be your learning space. All those kinds of things we want to work with parents to help establish those routines for students, because the more routines, the better message it sends to students, and it helps them to have a predictable learning environment and to really get the message that this is school. And certainly we're working on additional discussions about defining expectations for assessment and grading, and that information will again come out to parents from principals as we get closer. Moving quickly to full virtual, you're going to see some similar themes here. Social emotional wellness being the lead focus, student teacher connection being important, because this is a whole new, it's a lot of stakes, especially once we get to the high school years, especially once we get to junior, senior year. There's a lot riding on the education of our students. So making student and teacher connections critical, but again, recognizing even students, yes, they're more young adults, but they as well cannot functionally effectively after 6 and 8 hours of screen time. So balancing that, having reasonable expectations for everyone, and providing the supports necessary to do it. So what this will look like for at the secondary level is our new schedule will follow similar to the existing 9-period schedule every day, still with a 6-day cycle rotation like we would if we were in real life school. We did shorten periods so that we could reduce and limit some of the excessive screen time and include some breaks. That of course then will have to be somewhat supplemented by asynchronous work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got a bit of a scaled approach to that, so as students get older, that the time that they may spend on asynchronous work will likely increase. And then as the course level, like an AP course as compared to an elective course, is likely to have more asynchronous work. To simplify matters in the schedule, we started periods on the half hour. In school, when a period ends at 11:27 and the next one starts at 11:32, that's kind of normal life inside the walls of a school. That makes no sense to people outside of school. So by starting on the half hour, we believe it allows appropriate time for direct instruction, um, and for there to be some guided work time for students, and then a break between classes. And it just makes more sense that every time a half hour is rolling around, it's time for another class. We're building in additional time for academic support, similar to Academy, and then supporting our teachers in time for planning and professional development after school instead of on Fridays, and trying to build in breaks long enough that teachers could even use some of those for connect with students that may need support as well. So this is the proposed virtual learning schedule for the secondary level. Zero period would start at 8:30. So again, there's time for planning and professional development before 8:30 for teachers. Periods are half hour each. I'm sorry, 25 minutes each with 5-minute passing time or break in between. And you do see 2 break periods built in there. Of course, students will get lunch during their normal scheduled period. So students should automatically have yet another period off. Study hall would again be another period off. So there are inherent breaks built into the system. We do have Academy built towards the end of the day, 2:30 to 3. And then our after school time will be for professional development, faculty meetings, department meetings, extra help, etc. This is just a proposal. This is still a work in process, so do not hold us to these times. But just to give you kind of an idea of what we talk about when we graduated times, of how much homework students might be assigned per class. Again, it adds up to a lot, which is why it's still in process. And we need to look at some of those larger numbers. But we do need to make sure that we balance the synchronous, anything that we're not being able to deliver in synchronous, that we provide that through an asynchronous learning experience for students. Additional recommendations from this group, and again, parents as partners will be key in reinforcing these pieces for us. We will be requiring that students keep their cameras on when we come back in any virtual setting. What we discovered is as soon as students turned their camera off, they became very disengaged. It became incredibly difficult to connect, to assess their engagement, to assess what they were even working on. And it was very challenging for students once they lost that connection as well. So we need to increase some accountability by keeping the cameras on. We're working to find tools that will allow us to mask the background, similar to what Zoom uses, which then could provide everyone a sense of privacy about the home that's going on behind them, and take away any concerns or worries about that, but then allow us to enforce that those cameras remain on. We're also going to be requiring, this is really important too, that all students use the school provided devices, because we have a GoGuardian management system that will enable us to manage those devices, to know what students are working on. We're required to assess their engagement. So we need to know if they're engaged in the lesson, or if they're off on Minecraft, or if they're on web searches they should not be on. And I think it's important for parents to recognize too, GoGuardian is a powerful tool for us to monitor questions of concern about students. So if a student is struggling, if they're doing Google searches on concerning websites, that's the tool that triggers that to us, so that we can reach out to you and that we can hopefully head off problems for students. And again, as I said earlier, social emotional concerns being what they are, and the mental health needs that students are going to have, it's critical that we have that tool in place so that we can help support them and support you to make sure that our students stay healthy and safe. Additional expectations so you can expect, similar to elementary, appropriate environment, dressing appropriately for school. We're going to certainly at the beginning of the year be working with students to remind them the code of conduct still applies. There'll likely be some virtual versions of what that looks like, but teachers will establish classroom routines for casting, messaging, etc., and give explicit classroom management directions to run the class efficiently, etc. We will be taking attendance, so we're working on protocols to ensure that, whether we're virtual or in person. And we'll be really sending home some expectations that we hope the parents and caregivers can partner with us on, regarding what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how do you support your students, and what are the expectations that will be on them academically, as well as just from the behavioral side. So that covers a lot there in virtual for both.
Dr. Champ,
Elementary. Yes.
Dr. Champ, one thought, can you just define, in case people aren't aware, the difference between asynchronous and synchronous learning? I know that that's something that people
Yes.
came to understand better, but it says we're moving into this third option.
Sure. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. That is an important difference. Synchronous means the learning's happening at the same time. So when we're using that, we're really talking about either in person, obviously, is very synchronous. But if we're talking in terms of anything virtually through the computer, that's instruction where the teacher and the students are on and engaging in learning activities at the same time in a synchronous environment. When we talk about asynchronous, that's work that students could be doing really at any time. They will not be on at the same time as the teacher or the rest of the class. It'll be basically akin to a homework assignment, or in some cases, say potentially it's a fifth grade class, maybe a teacher goes on and does a synchronous lesson. So the class is there listening to the lesson, watching the direct instruction. Teacher asks some clarifying questions, and then allows the students to do some independent time. That can be a time where students maybe log off to get a little bit of a break from screen time and work on their work asynchronously. So by themselves, separate from a direct connection with the teacher. So that's really kind of the difference. And all these plans are really going to involve a balance of those. But our goal going into this plan was to increase the synchronous opportunities for face-to-face time with teachers. So now we have to cross into what is probably the most challenging. And this is why we decided to put our focus on having solid in-person and virtual plans, because if those are in place, those will then become the anchor that will help us through a hybrid, which will then be a mix of the two. So I think the reality, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I will say this, the reality at this point in time, and again, people know our schools, and they know that we've talked about social distancing. We have 100-year-old buildings. The reality right now is social distancing will be a significant challenge for us as a district, given our current facilities. We have made some inquiries about additional space, and at the moment we have not, there really does not seem to be outside opportunities. So working within our current footprint of our building, even thinking with the expansion of using tents and outside spaces, it's going to be a significant challenge for us to really consider a full back to school option at this point in time. So a hybrid is something that we very viably need to look at. So it's important that we lay this out as well. A hybrid model would be a blend of in-person and home live stream educational opportunities at the same time. I mentioned earlier those webcams, document cameras that would double as a webcam. That will be, again, a critical tool if we're in a hybrid scenario, because that would give the opportunity for a portion of the class, somewhere around 50%, to be in person in the schools in a more socially distanced environment and reduced density environment, while the other half of the class is home watching the live stream of what's going on in class, so that instruction can continue from day to day to day. And again, students in class would be doing assignments. Students at home would have those same assignments available to them through the Google Classroom. The students can keep up with what's going on in the classroom. As we decided on a model, and I'll remind you again, we recognize, and our surveys bared it out, there is no one model that will work for every family. As hard as that is, and as challenging as it is, I think we have to face that reality. It's important that we recognize that, but also understand within that we tried to find a model that we believe met the criteria of what our community had communicated to us, what the guidelines have communicated to us, and what fits in what we believe is in the best educational and social emotional interest of our students. So we did, those of you who are with us through the bond years, remember the decision analysis. It was not as long and tedious as the bond, but it still was an important process for us to go through, because it laid out the criteria by which we wanted to make our decision. So that we made it based not on emotion, not on which article was just posted in the newspaper last weekend, but based on criteria and based on facts and data that we have to help us make those best decisions around criteria. So these are the criteria we used. We actually used health and safety twice because it's so important. Any model we looked at had to be within the guidance, period, end of story, or it could not be considered. Additionally, we wanted to find which of the models best helped us to provide the most safe and safe and healthy environment for our students and minimize the risk to the degree we can. Again, we have to be cognizant. There's no way to eliminate risk. Our goal was to minimize it, pick a model that would minimize it to the greatest degree possible. We also needed to provide, most importantly, for the social emotional needs of our students and addressing developmental needs of students along the way. We needed to pick a model that would provide that continuity of instruction across models, one that could be feasibly scheduled and managed financially. You'll notice finance is not leading the decision here. It's down on the list, but it is a factor we have to consider. And then we wanted something that was feasible for families of students, feasible for staff. We used our survey results to help inform that discussion, and something that is somewhat aligned with the region. Keep in mind, we want to do what's best for Pelham, and that was our goal. But to the degree that we align with a district, that helps us on the workforce side of things, because if districts are functioning similarly and our staff live in other districts, in order for them to be able to come to work in our district, we needed to have some parity and consistency for any of us to have a chance to start to get the workforce back in place. So when we went through the hybrid models, we considered the 4 that went out in the surveys. And once we did that, those were the 4 surveys that you see here, the alternating every other day, every other week, AM, PM, and having secondaries on virtual, and then elementaries in person, and some variation of that along the way. Once we went through the decision analysis, the initial results brought us to that every other day seemed to be the best fit of the criteria, but I put that in there importantly, because we brought that back to the committees to then start to flesh out what it would look like. And we very quickly ran into some very significant logistical challenges that would actually disadvantage students, putting some in the position of never seeing their teacher in person and some always being in person. So that was not going to work. So that conversation led us to suggestions, ideas, brainstorming, and then led us to a proposal of a 2-day rotation model, where one cohort is in person, and then the other is watching streaming live at home, as I mentioned earlier, and then vice versa. So to give you a little bit of more detail on what that looks like, the model we're proposing and putting forward is that the students will be split into 2 different cohort models, cohort A, cohort B. We might call them blue and white, still figuring that out, but in essence, an A-B type model. We're basically trying to split them alphabetically, but also with a family or household grouping, an eye towards household grouping at the elementary level to the extent possible. And I say that going back to the concept that was strewn throughout the guidance, and that many articles have been written on, and there's some science to the idea of separating students into smaller pods or cohorts to minimize cross-contamination. So what this does is it divides our student body basically alphabetically, and trying to get families at the elementary level all in the same cohort, so that since they're already already home together, they would come to school together and then be home together. And then we're hoping that will help with health and safety due to that the cross contamination, but also hoping that will help with facilitation of childcare. If families know they have to get childcare for their elementary children all on the same day, hopefully that will ease things. So what this would look like is at cohort A would attend classes every Monday and Tuesday. B would attend classes every Thursday and Friday. And then we would use Wednesday as an alternating day back and forth between another day of in-person instruction. Some districts you're going to see are going to full remote on that day. We thought, given the feedback that we had and believing that in-person instruction was so important, we decided to plan for an alternating Wednesday. So on some weeks, Group A will have 3 consecutive days of instruction in a row. B will be live streaming on those days. And then B would have their in-person instruction on Thursday and Friday. The following week, it would reverse. A would be in for 2 days in person, and then B would get the 3 days of consecutive instruction. And this allows teachers to really be able to go in depth, knowing they've got the same group of students coming in front of them to sort of plan and to really have the ability to be consistent over time. And again, Wednesdays would be used rotating back and forth. I should note there are many Monday holidays. There's a couple Friday or Thursday holidays as well. So if we do have to use a hybrid model, we will map out what those Wednesdays might look like in advance to the greatest degree possible to try to assure a balance of in-person time. We don't want it to weigh more heavily on one cohort than the other. So we'll do our best to map that out in advance. So for those of you who are more visual, this might be a better example of what that looks like. So again, you'd see 1 week, hypothetically, A would be in person for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. B would be in on Thursday, Friday. The next week, A is in Monday, Tuesday. B is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and vice versa. And on the days the students are not in person, they would be home live streaming the class. They would have all the assignments, teacher resources, materials are being shared with the class, will be shared on the Google Classroom as well. So it's a little bit more of an independent work scenario, but they will have access to the direct instruction, access to all the materials so that they can continue to progress in their learning. So these are what we see as the highlights. It definitely takes advantage of cohorting. One important piece of this is, and again, every other day was presented challenges on the fact you're changing cohorts every other day. This model only has one cohort change during the week. So in terms of cleaning protocols and working to sanitize between cohorts, this gives us a much better opportunity to do that once a week and to really plan hard around doing that. And it gives us the weekend, of course, to do that same deep clean. Assures all students of in-person instruction every week, and it provides for 2 or more consecutive days of instruction weekly for all in-person days. And again, this model parallels with our virtual schedule. It parallels with our full in-person schedule. So this we saw as kind of the marrying of the 2 plans in a way that could give us some flexibility across the models. So next steps of this, we're really this was the 3rd model we started work on, so there's a lot more yet to do. But we're still identifying which master schedule we might use in this case because it presents unique challenges of its own. So it may be different from both of the other schedules, but still paralleling that kind of, whether it's a 9-period day at the high school, middle school, or more of the similar to an elementary schedule. So still working out details there, still defining what those expectations will be as far as the students who are live streaming and how teachers can support them, finding the tools and processes and training needed to support teachers so that they can best support students, and then defining, again, items around how much asynchronous work, what will it look like, how are we going to assess and grade, how are we going to be taking attendance, and how we handle discipline, et cetera, in this hybrid venue. 2 more slides, and then we'll open it up for questions. Special education services have been thought about throughout the design of all of these plans. We thought it was worth just calling out specifically at the end as well. Julia Chung put out a thought exchange, and the 4 bullets you see there were really some of the key pieces that were called from that feedback. So when it comes to our reopening plans, we are, especially with regards to the hybrid, we will be prioritizing more in-person contact time for high need students, just thinking specifically of our special class students. So those students who are in special smaller classes that need specialized instruction, we're working on plans to prioritize them for more in-person contact. We're also looking to supplement our online programs to make more resources available to support reading and the various accommodations. So some different kinds of adaptive technologies to help make sure students are getting the accommodations that they need to be successful. Also looking to develop tips, strategies, and resources to share with parents so that they can help their children who are having to function in this different environment, as well as helping general education teachers make adaptations and modifications to their approach to teaching, because there are definitely techniques that really help our students with disabilities to be more successful. And the same applies for our English language learners, although they're not specifically spelled out on this. Those same efforts and resources are going into ways to support them. We will, throughout this process, not just for special education, but for all, continue to seek feedback from staff and parents so that we can continue to evolve and tweak the plans and really try to do what is best for our students. CSE meetings will continue to remain virtual for the time being, so that's important for parents and community to note. And evaluations that did not get done this past spring, those have started to pick back up and will be going on throughout the summer. And finally, we end where we began, with social emotional well-being being the core of what we need to keep at the forefront of our minds, beginning of this year and throughout this year. So discussions are happening around, especially around transition years into kindergarten, as kids move up through the elementaries, 5th to 6th grade transition, 8th to 9th grade transition, and certainly, of course, our students who are heading into the college process. There's definitely thinking, discussions, and plans being made around those key areas. I mentioned earlier, our nurses are working on videos that will help to hopefully engage and make our students and make them feel more comfortable about some of the changes that they're going to be seeing on the health and safety protocol sides as they come back to school. We're going to be providing training and resources to our teachers. We've all encountered true trauma, adults and children alike. So having instructional practices in place to be more sensitive to that trauma, increasing our work in social emotional programs. Again, as I mentioned, we're doubling our efforts on responsive classroom, also looking to expand DBT, it's dialectical behavioral therapy at the secondary level to provide greater supports for our students. Also working on in areas of cultural responsiveness. As I mentioned in prior communications, we'll be having anti-bias, anti-racist, and culturally responsive training for all staff at the beginning of school, which really goes hand in hand with these social emotional supports. All students need to feel welcome and feel like they belong in our schools. So those efforts will be going forth hand in hand. And we're using surveys and assessment tools, again, to see the wellness of our students and to get them the resources that they need. We'll also be looking to our staff in order for them to lead and to teach and to care for the social emotional needs of our students, we need to take care of their social emotional needs, wellness, health, and safety as well. So we'll be reaching out to them to see what supports we can offer to them by way of mindfulness, work-life balance efforts as well. And we thank you to our community partners who will be helping us with that. And I believe that brings us to our question slides. And I'm going to stop sharing at this point so we can open up the floor to the board for questions. And I, again, will thank the administrative team for being here tonight, as they are great resources, incredible thinkers, and professionals that brought us to this plan tonight. And they have many of the details that I was not able to go into, they do have and know. And I appreciate them being here and able to share those with us tonight as needed. So I'll turn it over for questions at this time.
So, Dr. Okay, John, you want to go?
Yeah, understanding that the governor hasn't yet, see, I didn't say what I usually say. The governor hasn't told us how and how we can reopen. Has there been a determination about parents' ability to opt out if they don't want to send their kids back to school?
There has not been a definitive answer on that from the government yet. Superintendents are continuing to press that. We certainly are having some conversations internally about how we may manage that. So I do expect there to be more information coming. I will say parents should expect to see a survey in the next couple of days, just trying to get a sense of if we do, if we do have to go down that path, how many people we may have in that situation.
Yeah,
Because that presents a whole lot of complications from a staffing perspective, but we have to be thinking that way and starting to plan that way.
So do you have any preliminary thoughts? Is it a function of how many choose to do it?
Well, in a perfect world, there would be a critical mass of students matched to a critical mass of teachers that we could then have as a full remote separate school. That is not likely to happen. So, that's really one of the challenges that we face. And I guess I always like to underpromise and with the hopes of over delivering. But as I've said throughout this, right now we have that document camera as a critical tool in the classroom. And that's, if we're all in and there are students whose health prevents them from coming to school, that's going to be our connection. If we're in a scenario where we have to have where we have some kind of in-person learning, and there are families that choose to have their student stay at home, that will likely be the tool and the venue through which that education will be occurring. And I do think it's important for parents to understand that. If we were in a position, and this is still an if, and it certainly will be looked at, but we can't make promises around it, where we had a critical mass of students that were out and we're able to match that with teachers that could be shifted to virtual instruction, we could potentially have an improved scenario around that. But that gets incredibly complicated at the secondary level because you have certification issues to take into, content area specialties. So the reality is we will likely be leaning on the webcam live stream for students and parents who choose to stay at home if we are, if we do move forward with that sort of scenario. The other thing, and this is it's a touchy point, but I will bring it up, not because I'm advocating it, but just as an illustration. Since we have neighborhood schools, if we have, 2, 3, 4 students at a grade level who need to stay home or choose to stay home, that does not free up a teacher for them to be repurposed for in-person instruction. Other school districts you will see out there who have more of a Princeton model, there's the touchiness, do have the capacity to do that in a full virtual teacher. Okay, so that's just a function of our structure that I think it's important for folks to understand, because and this is part of why each district's plans are different, because we each have different limitations based on our structure, our facilities, our programming. So again, perfect world, that would be great to do, but we would really need that critical mass of students in order for us to be in, for it to fall in just the right way, that we could redo sections at the elementary level and then fully take a teacher out of the mix to become a grade level teacher virtually.
So you mentioned the 4D cameras, and all 3 scenarios you proposed involve a lot of new technology and a new way of teaching. It's a big departure from the typical of what we were doing before March. So one of the questions that I've received a number of times, both through the committee work and just people I chat with on the side, people have asked the type of teacher training that will go into keeping teachers comfortable with this new model, whichever one we choose, and continuing to learn the new technology. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, that will be one of the major tasks in front of us. Right now, we've been working towards getting the plan, aiming for this July 31st deadline. And again, keeping the list of all those things that need to happen. And that's one of our next tasks, is really put together that professional development plan, recognizing that is going to be crucial in the success. I don't know if Dr. Garcia or John Sabalos, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Dr. Champ stated, so we've been thinking about this now probably since March in terms of what could this look like if we have to deal with this again in the fall. Because back then we didn't know if school was opening again. We didn't know how far this was going to extend throughout last school year. So we began sort of vacillating, saying, what are the lessons we learned from this, and what can we possibly do differently? What can we try to do better? There's no playbook for it per se, but teachers have been working on improving their craft of actually working in a virtual environment for months now. Now it's getting to a point where we want to look at how do we sort of manage this specifically in the content areas where the teachers are feeling more comfortable delivering lessons in ELA and mathematics, especially at the elementary level, with greater fluidity and comfort. And that's a challenge because some people have different varying, ability levels with it. But we have some teachers who are already working on it. I know that working with other administrators and also teachers to identify some gaps and skills that we want to help teachers bridge that between now and when school begins. The problem, or let's just say the challenge we face, among other things, is that we have different models and scenarios. We just don't know which one's going to be sort of pulled off, right? And some people may say out there, maybe in the private sector, you should be able to figure that out. You've had 5 months to do it. It is a great challenge for us. So, we sort of accept that. We're used to having children. We're a social learning organization. We're used to having people in front of us. People are in this business because they like working with younger adults, children, and so forth. And unfortunately, this has created a sort of a veil for us as educators. And there comes with a lot of social emotional baggage for kids and also for adults. That's not really changing. It's just kind of helping teachers not navigate what that means in terms of teaching children, but also having to sort of be more resilient as adults working with children, sometimes through a device, but maybe half in front and half at home. So there's a lot of learning that still needs to happen. And to say that, we'll have it perfected by September 1st, I think would be, not telling you the truth. I think it's still a learning curve for everyone, mainly because of the fact that we don't know what's going to happen. But one thing we have been talking with the teachers about, we've been saying this for months, is that the Google Classroom environment is really the vehicle for us. And that's when we design learning experiences and when we look at how to communicate with the child and how to communicate with parents and that home school connection, that has to be the vehicle, whether we're in a full virtual environment, whether we're in a hybrid environment, or to be honest with you, whether we're all back in person, because we just don't know whether we're going to move back and forth between different models because of infection rates. So, to make to kind of shorten that answer is we have still a long way to go in terms of identifying, the different needs for teachers and skill set, but we are actively working on that. And I feel confident that the teachers will be prepared. But again, as educators, we're always in a state of learning, and we want to make sure.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
So first, I wanted to say thank you again to everybody. I know there have been hours and hours and hours of time, and that you've been short on guidance and you've been operating with uncertainty and science that seems to change every day. So thank you very much. We're very grateful for the work that you've put into this. And I think hopefully everybody understands that there is no good solution to this situation. Everyone's doing the best they can, and we all appreciate that. So I wanted to say that. But I do have a couple questions. The first one is about ventilation, which seems like the more we read is something that's very important. And I know that we have some old buildings where ventilation isn't ideal, and that we have some challenging weather. So I was just hoping that somebody could speak to what the plans are to make sure we have good airflow in the classes, and then what happens in the event of super, super hot days or when we're in the fall if it's really cold. I love the idea of using outdoor spaces to the extent we can. I think that's a great solution. But for the times that we're inside, I was just hoping someone could speak to the ventilation.
I'll ask Jim Ricky to field that question.
Thank you, Leah. You're right. As we go through our buildings, you'll see that the vintage of many of our buildings is significant and not modern like the middle school. So whereas in middle school we have a modern HVAC system, we're working with our contractor to up our filter levels and open the fresh air dampers to make sure we can pull as much fresh air into the building. At the other schools, the main standards that we've been hearing about are to make sure that the windows are open and we're receiving as much ventilation as possible. The other challenges you have are there's different codes out there, fire codes, that push for you to have doors closed at different times. So we want to do as much as we can to make sure that we're able to ventilate the building with fresh air. That would mean at the middle school, running that equipment pretty significantly at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. At the other schools, we'd want to get those windows open earlier in the day and ventilate the building earlier in the day to make sure we're able to get as much fresh air in the building as we can. And we're hearing different guidance as far as whether to have fans in the rooms, because there's been discussion about that and how that just creates more particulates flying around in the room, which is something you want to discourage. In fact, in the bathrooms, we don't want to use our hand dryers. We want to go back to good old paper dispensers for that same reason. We don't want to, again, push more air through the building. So those are the things that we're looking about. That's the guidance that we're going to be providing. The buildings are brick. When it's really hot, they hold heat, as we know. They're stone, and they don't cool off very easily at night too, especially when we get through a good hot stretch like this right now. I don't know if Dr. Champ wants to join in on anything as far as what we would do during the day. I mean, we'd certainly make sure we accommodated learning to make sure that there were sufficient breaks. And I don't want to overstep any other items like early dismissal day or anything like that. I don't want to get into trouble and say anything like that.
Yeah, they toss us to me on that one. No, but and I think those are things that we don't have answers for yet, but I think we have to be attentive to those things. And of course, we're in the midst of our second heat wave, third heat wave of the year, so that's very top of mind. But yeah, I think we're going to have to be attentive to that. I mean, the one good thing about this, it gives us some options. Should we need to make some changes, but we are actually trying to get some guidance for the state on that as well. That could theoretically fall under an emergency closure day, but I don't know that there's specified thresholds at this point in time. But it's something we'll keep our eyes on.
Hey,
Thank you.
Cheryl.
So,
Yeah, Vinny?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Leah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's okay. I had another question, but go ahead. I'll ask it later.
Oh, no, go ahead. You're on a roll.
Okay, so my other question is about movement breaks for the older kids, I see that you have the breaks put in the schedule. And I know it's a lot harder with a high school student to tell them what to do on their break, but maybe with the middle school students, is there any thought to having suggestion that the kids actually get up and move around during their breaks rather than just sit on their phone or their computer? Having experienced a college student with distance learning, there's a tendency to spend a lot of time sitting. And the kids will have homework later, and fewer activities after school. So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, I guess I would toss to maybe Dr. Callahan or Sean Llewellyn. They led the secondary team. Either one of you want to chime in on what the discussion was around the movement breaks for secondary students?
Sure, and we're talking in the context as of virtual learning?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, there's a fair amount of flexibility with the breaks built into the virtual schedule. And, one of the issues that we talked about is when students are attending full virtual, we really want to avoid them having 8 or 9 periods of instruction on the computer throughout the day, because it really goes way over the limit of acceptable screen time. So there are going to be certain subjects where it really doesn't make sense for the students to be viewing the class synchronously. And for example, physical education is one of those because of the nature of the class. Classes like art and oftentimes technology, where students work on long-term projects, does not always make sense. So, one of the options that we could discuss is, for example, with physical education, kids aren't attending those 40-minute sessions with their class. There could be options built in and communicated through Google Classroom where the students could be, for example, required as part of their assignments for the class to, in that 30-minute break, get outside and do something active, and that could fulfill their requirement for PE, for example.
And Sean, would that apply during the hybrid model as well?
So absolutely. It again, for students who are at home, watching other students play soccer doesn't do much. So when you're in that context, you want to try to give opportunities for the students to get away from the computer and to get outside during those breaks. Otherwise, like you said, if the student just moves from one device to another device, it really defeats the purpose, but it does add to that, negative impact of all the screen time. So we really want to work with the teachers to provide, opportunities for the kids to be active and away from the computers. The other discussion that's come up a lot at our, secondary meetings is, obviously there are lots of fantastic tools through which teachers can interact with their students over the computer, and great assignments and great software that they can interact with. But to the extent that the asynchronous work that's being assigned, and even the work that's for the class period, can be non-computer work. So maybe I experienced, a 15-minute demonstration of something, but now I'm actually shutting the computer off, moving away and doing something else. I'm going outside, I'm doing a scavenger hunt in my house or in my yard, or I'm, reading an actual book just to get away from that computer. When we talk about providing PD for teachers, I think one of the things we want to think about is, how can you transition from look at all of the wonderful things that the computer and internet can do to how can you get the kids off that and onto something that's real and tangible.
Thank you, Sean.
Great. Vinny, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. It's sports related. And my question to you is actually twofold. One, you had a date in there of September 21st of when fall sports would start. Would that be when the game schedule starts, or is that when practices would start?
I believe that's when practice starts. I think Mr. Hodge might be on the call with us tonight. I'm not sure if he is or not. Maybe.
I believe you're right, Dr. Champ. It's when practices would start.
Okay.
And they're willing to waive you have to have a certain amount of practices before you can actually compete. They're going to waive some of those. So we're still waiting for a little bit more direction with that, but officially when they would start practices.
Okay, so then with that said, would there be the ability to have captains practices before that, which are informal practices? And then with that said too, are all sports, fall sports, now going to be eligible, or due to contact, like football versus say a field hockey where there's minimal contact, would there be more of an inclination to allow certain sports over others, or would it be across the board, all fall sports would start on the 21st?
So we haven't gotten much more clear guidance than that actual 21st. That being said, the conversation is around, contact versus no contact, captain's practices. They're not really clear. They're not encouraging captain's practices. They're discouraging it. But, they're not really clear on much else other than that date.
Okay.
Looking at shortening seasons, that type of stuff.
Hello?
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I think Mr. Hodge was able to join us.
Yeah, I was sorry about that. I was on the YouTube version of it.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the live side.
Oh yeah, no problem. So
if you
that
could add-
21st, that 21st is the date that we can actually begin practice.
And the question was about coaches' practices before then, or is that still?
Yeah, that still hasn't been determined yet.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
And Mr. Hodge, since you are with us, can you maybe talk briefly about some of the ideas you shared with me earlier today about maybe PPE and protocols? Anything that you think?
Oh yeah, so I've been on a few calls with the state as well as Section 1, and one of the things that's come up that makes a lot of sense is as much non-contact as possible. And one of the things that people were talking about, and I was really thinking about this, is the whole deal with water bottles. And students, when it first came out, some of the recommendations from the CDC was, everybody have their own labeled water bottle. But then, looking at like the SEC, the ACC, the big colleges, they're talking about, eliminating water bottles and just having, water and cups and someone that mans that. So that's what I was talking about today with Dr. Champ, that we might have to look at investing into some, water coolers. They used to have the Spider. I don't know if you guys have that. It's the big water thing out there that the kids go up and grab it and can get some water from it, like a lot of different arms off of it, but that has to probably go away. And just for safety reasons, water with, utilizing as many cups as we can to just for the non-contact, as well as other PPE like gloves possible. So I did send a message to Dr. Garcia, and I'm going to be following up with him on that, possibly looking at being able to upgrade that area for athletics as well as phys ed.
Thank you. And for those who don't remember, Mr. Hodge is our new athletic director. Very excited to have him with us, and he's jumped in, is right on top of things. So thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Champ, I have a quick question. You talked about the logistics of temperatures and certifying temperatures and then also taking temperatures at the start of school. So in a hybrid model, could you just talk a little bit about what the logistics of that looks like? Is it the nurse that's doing that? Is it going to be a combination of people? How do we plan to kind of get people in the building if that's a daily temperature check?
I'm going to actually ask Julia Chung to address this. There's another place where we're going to really need parent partnership to get this job done.
Yes, absolutely. So we've been talking about with different principals, every building has different entrances and different number of entrances. So we're trying to determine how we can divide up the students through various entrances, and we'll have to designate one entrance in particular where if a child is not coming to school with a written signed, assurance by the parent, or for the secondary, we're possibly exploring an app. So if they don't have the piece of paper or the app that says that the assurance has been taken care of and checked off, then that student will have to go to a different entrance where there's a nurse who's going to be taking the temperature. So that's we're working it out. Every school is going to be different, like I said, because every school has different number of entrances.
Super helpful. So it's kind of an either or, right? So you either show up with a note from your parent or you'll have your temperature taken, but not necessarily every kid going in the building has to have their temp taken every day.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Makes sense.
Dr. Champ, I had a question about the more so in the younger grades, obviously elementary, but even kind of the early elementary. Are you envisioning, I know that there's time in the schedule for intervention and those activities, but are you envisioning that as a regular part of the teachers' plans that there would be smaller groups if we're totally virtual? Would they have the opportunity to do that?
For that question, I'm going to toss to Maria Thompson or Trish Fitzgerald. Which of you would like to tackle that one? Opportunities for small group instruction and virtual learning at the elementary level.
So if we were fully virtual, the idea would be that teachers would do their mini lesson and then they would send students to work independently if they were doing reading and writing, for example. And it would be during that time where they could call a small group if the students were told to, get off the meet and then come back on. We had long discussions just about small group work happening during the school day and keeping, a level of privacy for students too. We didn't want to have other students on the meet while a small group was being called. So we talked about that at length. They're definitely amongst the committee recognize the importance of maintaining that, even though we would, in the short amount of time we have during the school day, if we were fully virtual, we would have to ensure that they happen. Also, small groups can happen during IE, but the idea would be to actually integrate them at other times of the day. Trish, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, I do know that the committee really is in the forefront is their touch point with kids, and they do recognize the importance of small group work in the fully virtual environment.
Thank you.
I had a question. But someone go ahead of me if they have one. I already have one. Okay. My question is, in the all virtual setting, are the teachers going to be taking all their cameras and all their stuff home to them to teach from home? Or how is that going to work?
We still have to have some conversations around that. Definitely, I think there is interest in teachers coming into the building to teach from the classroom where they have everything, kind of to your point. So there's still some conversation around that. That may assist too, because we know that a number of people had internet connectivity issues at home, things like that over the course of the spring. And we did not make the schools available in the spring, but we certainly are going to look to make that an option in the fall, if needed.
Thank you.
Can you also speak to, I'm thinking of masks. So I have two questions about masks. One, the type of mask that will be required. And then I'm also thinking about the impact of a teacher wearing a mask, particularly for our youngest learners, or even just students as they meet their teachers for the first time. And they haven't seen what their faces look like. Should we enter school in person for the first time? Are there going to be opportunities for students to see what their teacher's face looks like? So mask.
So this is probably a mixed answer on this one, although Jim is the mask man. Julie has probably got the answer to the clear mask question. So Jim, you want to maybe just speak in general of what PPE will work here?
Yes, thank you. So for the PPE, people will be required to have a cloth mask covering or the surgical mask covering or something of better quality, which they can certainly have. If they don't have one when they come to the building, we will provide one for them. Kind of the triple ply surgical mask style mask that you've seen. We have ordered a large number earlier in the summer for children, so to make sure that the correct sizes for children. And we're also able to source them in larger sizes for the adults, and we believe we'll be able to have sufficient quantities to make sure that we don't run out. Like I said, people are able to bring in their own cloth masks if that's what they prefer to use. And then for nurses and those who are in more a closer type setting, we also will be providing the N95, KN95 style masks, which provide a higher level of filtration as well. And we have additional PPE, such as gowns and gloves as needed. Certainly gowns, paper gowns for those who have closer contact with students.
Follow up to that. Would that also be required? Would they also be required in the hybrid model when there's more distancing?
Anytime someone's in the building, they'll be required for it to have it, or anytime there's a potential for that contact. So I know we don't have a lot of busing, but we do have a one in-district bus, and we have a bus monitor. If that person will be expected to belt in students with that being that type of contact, they'll be required to wear mask and gloves.
So Jim, to Jessica's question about the being able to see somebody's face, will the teachers have face shields as well, so that if they were able to socially distance and not have their mask on but have the face shield, the students could see their face?
We have also ordered face shields so that we'll have sufficient quantities for all the staff if they choose to have one. And then I think Julia can step in a little bit more on information about specialty masks that she's been looking at.
So one of the things that we've been looking at is different types of masks, and they do have the type that has a clear plastic around the mouth. And I had actually just received some today, so I was walking on wearing that mask. But I think that's what we're gonna order for our probably speech language therapists, probably kindergarten teachers, and whoever else we feel it will be really important for us to actually have the mouth shown for the kids, because when you're trying to teach reading, we absolutely understand that that is critical in being able to see the mouth as the teacher speaking.
And I should add one commercial here. And this just goes to show what an amazing town Pelham is, and the continued support of those folks in the civics. Even though this is not specifically the civics, it's definitely some of the key leaders of the civics. I was contacted Michael Ming, who works with the Tobners for Bonafide Masks, has offered to donate to the district all of the PPE that we need as far as masks. And it's an incredibly generous provision, and that just continues to show how this community, we're all on the same team. We're all about making this work for our kids. And I just want to send my public thanks to Michael, to Bill, to Jim for their incredible generosity, both now and in the future. Really appreciate it.
That's incredible. I mean, we've talked about our budget, and certainly being in person requires us to have new budget lines that we never had before, budget increases. So we talked about that in the spring, but we're seeing this in action. So that's a huge help. Thanks to them. And also, just along the lines of masks, maybe I've heard this presentation now a few times throughout the committee, so I can't remember if you said it now or at another time, but the state guidance right now on masks versus distance versus barriers, what the guidance is on that.
The more they,
we're going with 2 of the 3, correct?
well, the more they clarify it, the muddier it gets.
Yeah,
But,
more confusing, I imagine.
they did define this. The most recent guidance was that social distancing is required unless I forget it quite how the phrasing was, unless the core function of work mandate requires that students be closer, or that people be closer. But then they defined instruction as a core activity. So it's kind of to the best to the degree possible. But again, I kind of to your point, that does we're aiming for social distancing as much as possible, but we recognize in our facilities that that's just not always going to be possible. So that's why we feel strongly that we need to require the masks, because we know that people will have difficulty social distancing appropriately. So that's kind of our aim for 2. And in those areas that we've identified where we know realistically we're not going to get the social distancing, that's where we're prioritizing for barriers. So, we're going to try to repurpose classrooms where there's tables, especially some of the elementary schools. We're going to try to move desks in instead so that we can get those desks as far apart as possible. But if we've got, say, cafeteria tables that we have to use because we don't have a different furniture, that's a place that we would then look at putting barriers up as that extra protection, because masks have to come off to eat. We need a barrier because we don't have a mask. We don't necessarily have distance. We need a barrier. Main offices, where teachers are coming in to check the mail, see the principal, where, parents may be dropping something off. A lot of high contact, high traffic areas, can't guarantee social distancing, that's prioritized. And so again, as we assess classrooms, as well as we find situations where, maybe a teacher would like it on on their desk so that it can have students come up closer and do some individual conferencing, or maybe some of our specialists need like those semicircle tables where students gather around in person. We're finding some solutions to allow for that necessary work that give the extra layer. They're not going to be everywhere. I think that's important for folks to know too, especially in the hybrid where we're able to separate desks more significantly. But we're trying to prioritize those areas. So we do aim for 2 out of 3.
I had a question about that hybrid and the separation. We're talking about the benefit of the hybrid is people can spread out more, but then we're changing cohorts. And we talk about not having lockers or cubby rooms. Is that desk going to be shared between the A cohort and the B cohort? And then I guess similarly at the middle school and high school level, as we're moving classrooms and they're entering new spaces, is there any sort of procedure or plan for how that transition happens?
So at the elementary level, they will be using the same desks from cohort A to cohort B. They'll be sanitized in between. And then same thing on the weekends. Middle school, high school is definitely more challenging. We're looking for some creative solutions there. Jim, if you want to talk maybe about some of the products we're looking at, we're even talking about using like paper blotters. Students come into the class for 5th period, they grab a big sheet of construction paper, put it on the desk like a desk blotter as a little bit of a separation. We're looking maybe, in some ways to be creative and simple. But Jim, did you want to talk about some of the products that hoping to use at the secondary?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we're looking at is a product called BioShield. It's a product where you would apply it onto the surface of a furniture, say like a desk, and it provides a long-term repellent to viruses like COVID. It's difficult to acquire and quite expensive, but it can prove to be obviously long-lasting. So we're looking towards that. We also are looking to have antibacterial wipes, like Lysol wipes in every room. If the instructors want that, we're going to be cleaning those desks and sanitizing in the evenings as well. We're using electrostatic sprayers. So again, trying to use our disinfectant tools to the best of our ability so that we can address it as much as possible. We're not going to be able to get to it in between all classes. That's why something like what Dr. Champ mentioned, as far as if we were to use something like paper to put on the desk in between, that's an option as well. Also, as I should mention, we're going to have sanitizer in all those rooms as well so that people can sanitize their hands. And the reason we have it in the room versus in the hallways is just we want to make sure people are being supervised in their use of it. It's just a high alcohol content item, and it's not something we want to leave unsupervised with the flammability of it.
Jim, while you're on, there's been a lot of discussion about tents, use of outdoor space, mask breaks for kids. So I know this is something you are looking into, and it was mentioned in each of the in-person options. So just, I know we don't have all the answers on this, and we still don't know yet if we're going to be able to be in person or not, but just what you can touch on based on what you know now on that
Sure.
front.
What we've known, and then I'll just share some discussions that I've had with a reputable tent rental company that believes that they can supply tents for us. Wanted to look to see, and again, they've been working with other schools and institutions as well. Looking at a 20 by 30 tent, which would be a 600 square foot tent, you'd be able to get a social distance of about 15 students under such tent and an instructor. Similar and about to the same size of an average classroom. As we looked at tents, we would want to see if we could place them throughout the district. At the elementary schools, we would ideally want to have a minimum of 2 at each school. And then at the middle high school campus, you'd probably want to have 10 to 15, depending on what you could secure. When we look at that, if you look at a location such as the Hutchinson School, though, really the only places that would be viable for establishing those tents is probably on the blacktop area at Julianne's playground. So it's certainly far away from the school and not in a really ideal place for it to be. But it's in a secure place where it's fenced in, because as Dr. Chant mentioned, we have the bacteria, the germ threat from within, but we also have to remember the threats from outside that we've trained for, and really we've worried about all this time prior to this happening. At a location such as Colonial, you could place those tents in the back area, and then you would lose some of that play area. So perhaps an option there would be to put those tents for Colonial on the middle school, high school area, I'd say on Franklin Field as an option, because the school does use that field quite a bit for their play area during lunchtime and breaks and PE when needed. So that's an option that we would look into. At Siwanoy, again, you have the option of placing the tents inside the fence, although it's a very low fence, as you know, in that area. If you were to place them in other places of the property, we would probably look to secure temporary fencing to make sure we could secure that site. And similar to Prospect Hill, we could probably fit all 20 tents at Prospect Hill, but as you know, there's now not really any fencing over there, and we even with 2 fences, we'd want to have an area where we could make sure it's secure for our students. At the high school, middle school area, we've got the Franklin Field and Ingalls Field. Both of them are completely fenced off and secure. So as you look at it, those are definitely viable areas. And again, we would be looking at, say, a 20 by 30 tent, 2 flaps, no electricity or HVAC in those tents, and a simple floor on that too. So we wouldn't have a grass floor when we set up on the fields.
So Jim, are those closed-sided tents you're looking at?
It would be two sides would have closed sides is what we're looking at. And you know, those are kind of, you can take the panels on and off as needed. But we want to make sure we've got some airflow, because of course that's the benefit of using those tents. And at the same time, though, we want to be mindful of the elements and try to save ourselves a little bit there. So as we looked at it, we said, let's kind of spec it out with 2 sides. And what I speculate could happen is some may have none, some may have 2, some may have 1. We really won't know until we actually place them, and then we'll figure out exactly what we need at that time.
How long do we anticipate we'd be able to hold classes in the tents?
Well, I think for lunch, you'd certainly get a longer stretch. I see kids in their shorts playing outside in January. Now, middle school kids, but they're running around, right, Lynn? They're in their shorts in January.
What, coat?
Yeah. I think
Sweatshirt.
sweatshirt and shorts. Yeah. I think ideally we would probably say you'd want these tents from the September 1 to Jan 1 timeframe. That's the time frame I provided to the tent company. I don't think you get a lot of use out of them, obviously, after the Thanksgiving time period, just because weather would not cooperate and it would be a lot colder.
Well, you'd also be in a condition where 1 week you'd have great weather for the tent, and the next week it would be terrible.
Exactly.
So, you're going to be in and out of the tents.
And you know what happens? The week you get rid of them, you're going to have Indian summer right after that. So,
Well, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, can we go back just for a moment, Julia, to the temperature taking? I think it's important just to be really clear. The state does require that all students and staff have their temperature taken daily, but it does in the guidance say that ideally that is done at home. I think that's an important piece for people to understand, and also to understand the logistical challenge that would be even in a hybrid model. If we had, Lynn, we have what, 750 high schoolers, half that, 375 high schoolers, 450, I'm sorry, middle schoolers, 450 high schoolers. The logistics of trying to do that at school, we would never get to teaching. So the guidance specifically does inform us that doing that ideally at home is the best plan. So that's, if folks are wondering why we're not doing it at school, that really is why. The guidance paired with the infeasibility of doing it really necessitate that we again rely on parents as partners to help us with that each day.
Yeah, and our district doctor, Dr. Legue, we've had several conversations with him, and his recommendation was also it's best to take temperature the night before. It's most accurate before students go to bed. So that's kind of going to be our plan, where we try to remind parents every night. It might be like a text blast that just reminds the parents, please take your child's temperature, and whether it is paper format or the app, please make sure to fill that out so that the student is ready in the morning to come to school with some sort of assurance that you've taken the temperature and have checked off the different health questionnaire questions.
Other questions?
So Dr. Champ, I have some messages that came in for public comment, and we have it at the end of the meeting, but I'm just wondering, since we still have business to do, if we should move that up earlier. And then I also just wanted to ask you, so I have 4 that came in by our 8 o'clock cutoff, and then a couple of just like small questions that people are sending to me now. I don't have their addresses, and in reaction to the presentation. So maybe those messages I'll pass along to you tomorrow, and then I'll read the few for public comment. That sounds like a good plan. Okay, so if you emailed me in the last little while, we'll make sure that everybody's going to get a response from one of us at the end of the, in the next day or so. But I'll read the ones that came in earlier for the public record. Okay, so David Rothman wrote, my child will be entering kindergarten this fall. It will be her first introduction to public education. From what I've heard, there is a tendency for a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to solutions for K through 12, even though age matters in terms of the educational and social needs of the child, as well as how susceptible they are to the virus. My hope is that our educational leaders understand this difference. An older child's education might be disrupted by remote learning, but for the very young, like my daughter, I feel the year will be lost. So David, we will get back to you. I know that this is something that we are very focused on. Okay, Lauren Frasca wrote, hi, Jessica. I hope this note finds you well. I know the board has been working tirelessly to plan for the fall and want to express my deep gratitude for this. I have a comment/question for tomorrow's BOE meeting. While much of the science surrounding COVID-19 remains inconclusive, one thing that does seem clear is that risk of transmission outdoors is significantly lower than in. I believe there's a lot of interest amongst district parents in exploring outdoor learning to as great of an extent as possible, and would love to understand how creative use of outdoor classroom space will be addressed in both the hybrid and in-person plan. On a side note, I'm in touch with a group of about 50 parents and growing who are all standing ready to volunteer to assist the BOE in any way possible this fall. If you think there is anything in CAPS we can do to help in this extraordinary situation, please let us know. Okay. Dan Nicastri, 919 Plymouth Street. Dear Board of Education, I'm writing to request that a 5-day week in school option be available to the willing. I understand that a 5-day week at home distance learning must also be available for anyone who doesn't feel comfortable, who tests positive and is in isolation, or as a family member who has tested positive, thus putting them in quarantine. My request is consistent with the following organizations' recommendations: the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, the American Association of Pediatrics, and Center for Disease Control. I would further like to advocate for others who have been considered essential. When data from the caretaking of essentials children were analyzed, including 40,000 children during the highest prevalence of virus at YMCAs throughout the country, there were no outbreaks. Furthermore, only 1% of the WISE workers actually contracted COVID, a rate lower than the baseline in their communities. Furthermore, multiple other countries have opened schools with trends continuing downward. I would like to address the following concerns. This is the best time for us to consider opening schools, and we should do it with masks, the best physical distancing possible and realistic, and we should open the windows. New York State is testing at less than 1% positivity. At the absolute earliest, if a vaccine is developed, it would not affect our community until January 2021. We will not know the long-term effects of the vaccine, just as we don't for COVID-19. We may never have a vaccine. This will be the first coronavirus vaccine ever. Putting the kids back in school is not an experiment. Keeping them out from March through December would be an experiment. Masks should be worn and physical distancing should be accomplished at the highest level possible while offering this as an option to all willing. There's not a single case of a super spreader event that happened when the infected were wearing masks. Furthermore, the risk of spread outdoors is so small that anything we can do to improve ventilation will only lower this risk even further. Children are the lowest risk group for infection and spread. Ages 0 to 9 spread less than any other age group and rarely to an adult. At this time, there is not even a single anecdote of spread from child to teacher. The South Korean study was conducted during the period in which kids were in school for 2 out of 3 months. They were the index case leading to spread 2.7% of cases. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to some of these. There's a lot of articles which I'll pass on to the board as a reference. Teachers in schools are essential. They are arguably more essential than any other professions that continued working during the peak of the pandemic, while New York was the epicenter. They are also a young, low-risk group. The median age of teachers is 41 and 77% are less than 55 years. The high-risk ones can run the distance learning. The lower-risk ones, including teaching assistants, can be in the classrooms. All of the essentials, all the data show that teachers should be working in the lowest risk environment compared to others. I say this as a son of a teacher of less than 40 years in the New York City, of more than 40 years in the New York City high school system, and the grandson of 3 New York City school teachers. Please consider these thoughts. And there's one more. I'll pass these on to the board as well. From Kate Kerrigan. Please allow us to express our heartfelt thanks to the district and its leadership in this time of crisis. Reopening our schools is clearly a complex, evolving process and one we are all in together in the best interest of our kids. We wish to convey to the board that there are many Pelham parents interested in identifying supplemental resources to support the district's planning process and to offer our help. Inspired by a recent article concerning the use of outdoor classrooms in public school settings, many parents have begun to work together and identify what forms these additional resources could take, from tents to provide shelter for outdoor opportunities, to neighborhood-wide Wi-Fi access, to PPE that helps kids see and share smiles. The parents I've spoken with want to innovate and achieve what today feels so challenging, making this moment in our kids' journey of lifelong learning meaningful, joyful, and even fun. Garnering all of these big ideas and efforts to maximize safe in-person learning will require a degree of shared responsibility, coordination, and resources that schools have never been able to count on. And that hasn't changed with this pandemic's arrival, writes Sarah Darville in an op-ed published in the New York Times. Perhaps we are idealists, but with our expert, hardworking district leadership, dedicated teachers, and creative and passionate parents, we believe Pelham can meet this challenge and become a bellwether for public school districts around the country. And I have her address in an earlier, sorry, email, 414 Wolf's Lane. So we will respond to these in the coming days. I'll make sure Dr. Champ and her team and the board sees all these emails as well as the questions that came in after the public comment. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thanks to the administrative team again for their endless hours, dedication, thoroughness, professionalism, child-centeredness. I could go on and on. Really, thank you for your presence here tonight. And I know we're almost across the finish line. So go to bed and see you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much for a great night. We really appreciate your presence here tonight. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was very informative.
Thank you.
And Dr.
do we
Champ,
have to adjourn?
Council's meeting tomorrow, correct?
Yeah, there's PTA. That's just me and Julia. Julia and I will be there.
But
Steve.
in terms of if others didn't join this meeting or haven't yet listened to the recording, that's always a meeting that's open to
Correct.
the public, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Sorry, Eileen, you had something?
I thought it was time to adjourn, but I forgot we have other business.
Yeah, you got ahead of yourself.
Sorry.
That's all right.
We're getting close. A little bit more business to go. So, but we did move up public comment. Oh yes, Eileen, you were ready to do your job. Okay, so now we're on to section 4, which is financial reports and motions. I would like to have a consent of 4.1 through 4.8. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Vin. Thanks, Eileen. Any questions or comments, or Jim, anything you want to add?
Just comment at the top, you see we have the last of our 1920 budget transfers, really just to get all our books in order. Auditors were here last week or the week before, actually, and we're going to be asking the audit committee to meet shortly. Got our treasurer's reports. We have a tax certiorari settlement and some nice change orders. 4.6, they were below the threshold for board approval. We're making notification, and they're all credits, so these are the easy ones to approve anyway. So we have some others there. They're going to be going the other direction. That will be making notification on probably at the next board.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 5, Superintendent's Personnel Recommendations. I'd like to take a consent of 5.1 through 5.4. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any thing to add, Jim or Steve?
We just have some stipends to approve and also some summer work and personnel items with hiring some teachers, which is what we'll continue to do over the summer. And I think we have some great recruits, so looking forward to that.
And on the Schedule C, we just have revised terms and conditions for some of non-represented personnel, resignations of some of our school monitors, some of whom will be moving forward with us as student teachers. So they're leaving one position, but yet they'll still be with us. And then just the appointment of our hourly monitors for next year with their hourly rates.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Section 6, People Personnel Services. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Eileen and Vinny, I believe. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 7, New Business. Do we have any new business? Okay, we already did communications from the public. So, Eileen?
Madam President, would you?
Eileen, can I get ahead of you just for a
Of
second?
course.
I actually need to ask if you could make a motion for us to exec session instead
Oh.
of adjourn to the.
Yes, it's true.
Okay. Madam President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session?
I would. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Leah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Great, thanks you guys. I sent an exec session link, so board and cabinet, please be sure to jump over there.